Our speaker today has kindly agreed to share the slides. We're also recording the event, so he's happy to share the video afterwards as well if you want to show any of your colleagues. So I won't waste any more time. Please help me in welcoming Dan Monheit, who is the co-founder and strategy director at Hardhat. Dan's joined us before and he's done a wonderful session for us in the past. He's backed by popular demand. If you're not familiar with Dan, he actually has a podcast, and obviously Hardhat is a big agency, and he's also happy to help you out with all your marketing needs. So welcome, Dan, and over to you.
Hey, David, thanks so much for having me back, guys, and thank you all for attending. Yeah, it's nice to be doing a return performance. One of the, I guess, things I'm conscious of is there are perhaps people on here who were on the previous one and also people who weren't. So what I want to do, I'm just going to spend just the first 1 or 2 minutes just going back over some real foundational concepts from the world of behavioral science or behavioral economics. And then we're going to dive into some fresh, brand new content for everybody. So for those of you guys that were here last time, you'll remember something that I talked about right at the start was something that I love about being in agency land and something that I love about working with lots and lots of marketers is the inherent curiosity in everybody, really. And we spend a lot of time as marketers and just as humans asking about how things work. So we have lots and lots of questions about how social media works and how marketing automation works and how direct-to-consumer models work and how zero-based budgeting works and how attribution modeling works, how everything works. And this is all great, and these are wonderful questions, and I love that we ask them, and we should continue asking them. But one of the things that I don't hear getting asked a whole lot is, how do people work, right? Why do people make the choices that they make? Why do we do the things that we do? And it's worth asking because, number one, we've been doing the things we do for a long time now, right? Our species and the internal wiring within us have evolved slowly and fairly methodically over about 300 million years. And while the tools and the techniques and the environments change, the core motivators that drive us tend to be very bloody stubborn. So that is one reason why it's worth asking how people work. The other reason is because it doesn't matter how good your social media strategy, your content, your zero-based budgeting, your marketing attribution modeling, whatever it is, the other half of the equation is the people, and spending a little bit of time and energy understanding a bit more about how people make decisions absolutely cannot hurt. And I would suggest is perhaps going to be pretty helpful and hopefully enlightening. So that's what we're going to do over the next 40 minutes or so. Now, as we dive in, I just need to set up some other really sort of foundational concepts around the world of behavioral science. And to do that, I'm very conscious that I've got a pretty well-versed audience on the line here. So please excuse me as I go into the world's shortest and most incomplete lesson on the human brain. So we all know what our brain is. We all know where it's located. Most of us probably know that it weighs about 3 pounds and can be divided up into an array of different sections and systems that do different things. There are 2 sections of the brain specifically that I would like to draw your attention to this morning. The first is the large section up the front. It kind of sits in just behind our forehead here, and it is called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex takes up around 12 to 15% of our total brain mass, and it is the part of the brain responsible for anything that we would consider rational thought. So when you are doing long-term planning, when you are doing goal setting, when you are determining what's good and what's bad, or weighing up future impacts of current actions, that is all happening in your prefrontal cortex. And I should just let you guys know, I'm going to share some slides in a second, but I just want to do this stuff on a real model. This is the only time I get to be a model, right? Of myself talking about a brain. So prefrontal cortex up the front here, and basically responsible for long-term thinking. In evolutionary terms, this prefrontal cortex is the newest or the most recently developed part of our brain. It's sort of the NPD or the NPR, the new product innovation part of our brain, at a paltry 200,000 years young. And it is also the part of the brain that is really only found in humans. And so this prefrontal cortex is what lets us make decisions in a way that is completely different to every other animal on the planet, right? Because as we all know, when it comes to making decisions as humans, we are not animals, right? We are very consistent and rational. We are considered, we are pragmatic. When forced to make a decision, which we do thousands and thousands of times a day, we know that we always stop, look at all of the available options, do our research, weigh up the pros and cons, and then make the choice that is rationally, pragmatically, logically the most effective thing to do, right? Of course not, right? We don't do that at all. In fact, we hardly ever do that because, as you guys remember, two parts of the brain I said I want to introduce you guys to today. The second part is what's called our reptilian brain. And so while the prefrontal cortex is at the front, the reptilian part of the brain is kind of right in the middle, right at the back of our head, kind of at the top of the spinal cord there. And this is the oldest, most primitive part of the brain. So you imagine the brain kind of evolving from the inside out. Prefrontal cortex is the newest bit on the edge. The reptilian brain is the most primitive part right in the core there. And the reptilian brain dates back around 300 million years. It's called the reptilian brain because it is about on par with the brain function of what you would find in most primitive animals, including reptiles. And it is driven by our most basic primal urges. So fear, greed, status, self-preservation, lust, reproduction, all of that stuff is basically happening in our reptilian brain. And it is also where the vast majority of our decisions are instantly and invisibly made, just like every other animal on the planet. Where we do differ from other animals is that we have this prefrontal cortex bit at the front that essentially acts as a very good PR department, constructing logical, pragmatic, rational stories to explain what our reptilian brain has just decided we should do, right? So the prefrontal cortex says, yes, of course you should buy that sports car because of the fuel efficiency and the safety features, which are amazing, right? Not because you think it's going to give you a better chance of, looking like an alpha person or reproducing. It's the prefrontal cortex that says, yes, you should definitely buy that handbag because of the way that it fits your laptop so beautifully, right? That is what our prefrontal cortex is doing, right? So it's doing a great job of making excuses and being the PR departments for our brain. Now, this is a very good segue into behavioral economics or behavioral science, because what behavioral economics does is a field of study that helps us bypass this PR messaging and identify how decisions are really getting made back there. And at the core of behavioral economics is, so I can just see a couple of notes. No one's seeing any slides. There are no slides. So if you guys would like to see a slide, I can bring one up, but it's currently would just be a slide that says behavioral economics. I'm about to bring some slides up. So just stay with me. I know I'm not the best looking presenter in the world, but I'm doing my best here. So look, at the core of behavioral economics is not just an acceptance, but actually a sort of two-armed bear hug embrace of the idea that we are nowhere near the rational, pragmatic decision makers that we think we are, and that in actual fact, most of our choices are heavily dependent on our emotions, on our biases, and on the context within which we make these decisions. So behavioral science, behavioral economics kicked off in the 1950s, and in the 70 years since has built up oceans of evidence based on thousands and thousands of studies that shine this kind of giant floodlight on the mysterious question of why humans do the things that they do. Now, within behavioral science, there is a concept of heuristics, and heuristics are basically these consistent, predictable quirks that shape our decision-making, often resulting in us doing things that you wouldn't necessarily consider the most logical or rational choice. And once you understand what these heuristics or biases or quirks are, you get to start building products and services and brands around them. And in the world of behavioral science, there are around 200 to 300 of these. And what we have spent really the last 12 months doing since COVID really kind of kicked off is looking at a dozen, which we believe are really highly relevant for the world going into and now coming out of lockdown. So there's a dozen of these here, which we've really spent some time going into. On the last presentation that we ran through with you guys, we picked 3 of these, and today we're going to be going through 3 more, and hopefully you guys can see some slides now. So the 3 of these biases that we are going to be going through today are, and so last time we looked at social proof, halo effect, and your exposure. Today, choice paradox, effort bias, temporal discounting. And what we're going to do is we're going to spend maybe 8 or 9 minutes on each of these. We are going to look at what it is, why it happens, some of the seminal research that underpins these biases, and then we're going to look at some ways that we can use these in our day-to-day lives as marketers and product and brand people. I will be doing my best to check the Q&A section while we go, and we'll also have plenty of time at the end for some questions. So let's just dive into the first one. So the first bias for today is choice paradox. And to me, I mean, this feels like a good one to start on today because choice paradox feels quite personal, right? It feels like it really speaks to me because as capitalists, right, we love having choice in our world, and choice paradox is all around the way we handle different options. So choice is good, choice is important, choice is something we all go through our days kind of appreciating at various levels. But the thing is, as marketers, we are essentially the Navy SEALs of capitalism, right? We love choice so much that we have effectively dedicated our careers to giving people choices, right? We spend our days and sometimes our nights and sometimes our weekends thinking about giving people more product, more services, more options, more ways to talk with us, more ways to consume our content, more ways to basically do anything that they could want to do in life, right? We love the idea of having choice because choice makes us feel powerful. It makes us feel in control, right? Choice and having the freedom to choose really is the lifeblood of this modern, brand-filled, option-rich society that we not only live in, but actually actively contribute to making. The thing is, when we set out to create a world around the idea of choice and the power and the freedom of an individual to choose, we never could have imagined how well we would execute on that vision. Because here we are at the start of 2021, and any of us with Netflix, which I imagine is most of us, right, could start streaming one of more than 2,000 shows right now. Whether you walk into a Coles or a Woolworths or an Aldi, right, the average Australian supermarket has more than 20,000 products in it. And this is after at least a decade of very, very deliberate consolidation by the supermarkets and trying to have less products for us to choose from and trying to make it a bit easier. Still more than 20,000 products in the average Australian supermarket. And whether you're on Android or iOS, more than 2 million apps that any of us could download and start interacting with right this very minute. Now, as capitalists and as marketers who are the Navy SEALs of capitalism, doesn't all of this choice feel amazing? And the reality is, often, no. Often it doesn't. Often all of this choice feels far more like a curse than a liberation. And there are some pretty good reasons for that. So the first is that for our poor little brains, right, that are, 300 million years in the making and only not very long and having to deal with 20,000 products in a supermarket, this is really hard work. Like, we are not used to having to deal with all of this choice. So it is hard goddamn work to have to think about so many things all the time. And you don't have to look very far back in the rearview mirror of human history to see a time when we did not have anywhere near this much choice, right? Because instead of choice, we had rules. We had very, very strict rules for everything. Rules set by the state, rules set by the church, rules set by very tightly held societal norms. And these rules basically taught us everything, right? They taught us where to live. They taught us how to dress, where to work, which days we should work, who we should marry, when we should marry, whether we should have kids, how many kids we should have, who should look after the kids, who should go back to work, when we should retire, and on and on and on it went. And while I'm certainly not advocating we should go back to a time like that, you can appreciate just for a moment kind of how much simpler life would be when you don't have to decide everything, right? Because today we don't have most of these rules. Rules from the state, rules from the church, rules from societal norms are nowhere near what they were even 100, 150 years ago. And so in the absence of rules, we have choice, right? And choice is negotiation. Choice is thoughts and pros and cons and conversations and considerations and lists and should I or shouldn't I? Where should I live? Where should I work? How should I dress? Should I get married? Who should I marry? Should we have kids? How many kids should we have? Once we have kids, who should look after them and who should go back to work? And on and on and on it goes. And it is hard, oftentimes overwhelming work to have to make decisions about so many things so many times a day. The second kind of challenge with all of this choice is that, in fact, more choice often leaves us less satisfied. The reason for this is because we cannot help but think about all of the things that we are not choosing, right, out of 2, right, you are now not picking 99 pairs of genes. And every one of those 99 pairs of genes comes with its own list of features and benefits and attributes that you are now deliberately walking away from. And what's kind of cruel in the human condition is that we cannot help but run constant simulations in our brain about how our life could have gone if only we picked those other genes, if only we picked that other job, if only we picked that other agency, if only we picked that other husband or wife, right? And on and on and on it goes. And even that only happens if we make a choice in the first place, because often when we are confronted with too much choice, we just make the simplest choice of all, which is what? Choose nothing, keep wearing the same jeans you've been wearing for the last 3 years, right? Because they seem to be doing okay. They'll probably be back in fashion pretty soon, right? So with too much choice, often we will just walk away and choose nothing. Now, if we have a quick little dive into the research here, if you are a research fan, you might have heard of this study. If you are a jam fan, you might have heard of this study. If you are a research about jam fan, you have definitely heard of this study. It is one of the most well-known studies in the world of behavioral science. And it is, drumroll please, the 2000 study from Inigo and Lepper, colloquially known as the fancy jam experiment. Now, what these guys did was they went into a fairly fancy supermarket in the US, and it was a supermarket that was very well known for having lots and lots of choice. So, hundreds of different types of salami and hundreds of different types of olives. And the whole premise of this fancy supermarket was that it was built on choice. And what these guys wanted to do was test the impact of more choice on sales. So, very, very cleverly designed experiment. They set up in the exact same spot in the exact same supermarket on back-to-back weekends. And on each weekend, they had a little table set up for people to come and sample some jams. And what was really clever about what they did was once you sampled the jam, you were given a little coupon that you could then go and redeem to buy the jam if you liked it. So this let them check 2 things. Number one, it let them check what proportion of people actually came in and had a sample, because they could see how many coupons they'd given away. And then of the people that had a sample and got a coupon, how many actually went and purchased some jam in the end. So on the first week that these guys set up their little table in this fancy supermarket, there were 6 different jams for people to choose from, right? And well, how did 6 jams go? Well, 6 jams went pretty well. So look, I've never really done much sampling personally, but I can only assume that 40% of people stopping is pretty bloody good, right? That's like almost half the people that came into the supermarket stopped for a sample. And of the 40% of people who stopped, 30% went on and bought some jam. So that feels like that's a pretty good strike rate to me. Now, knowing how much we all love choice, the following week on the same little table in the same fancy supermarket, they decided to set up with 24 types of jams for people to choose from. Now, what you guys can see straight away is the proportion of people that stopped skyrocketed, 150% more, right? More than half the people that came into the supermarket stopped to try some jam. Maybe they were just curious about what 24 different types of jam look like, because it's kind of preposterous, right? But remember, most of us are not in the business of giving out samples. Most of us are in the business of sales. And so while 60% of people stopped, only 3% actually went on and bought. Something happened between Jam 7 and Jam 24 where we just exploded people's brains. We just got them to think too much about the different types of jams and whether they really had picked the right one and whether they really liked it more than all of the other 23 that were there and more than the one that they already had at home. And they just decided, this is too hard. My brain doesn't need to spend so much energy determining what jam I'm going to buy. I'm just going to go home and have the same jam that I've been eating for weeks or months or years now. So the first thing that we can see here is that often, right, less choice is better than more, even though that's not exactly what we think we want, which is why we have this concept called the choice paradox, right? And it is called a paradox for a reason, right? While we love the idea of choice, while we love the concept of choice, while we feel we are entitled to more choice and that more choice is better, we are very, very bad at having to choose, right? So the paradox is we think we love it, but we actually are not very good with doing it, right? So if we just pause for 1 second here, the first thing that we can learn here is that some choice is better than none, but more is probably not better than some. So as far as ways that we see brands getting around this in the world, I mean, one thing that you can do if you're offering people too many choices, which let's be honest, you probably are, right? One thing you can do is you can just tell people which one you want them to pick. Now, they're not going to pick it every time, but the thing that you suggest is reasonable a disproportionate amount of the time. So this is a great little example here from MailChimp, which is an email marketing services provider. And these guys have a whole bunch of plans and products for you to buy. And when you go into the pricing page, it just says this one's recommended, right? And so if all else was equal, this is just the one you would pick, right? And if anybody here has worked at McDonald's, I spent 4 years working at McDonald's while I was in high school. One of the things you learn is if you're working the cash register and somebody comes up and orders a Big Mac meal, you say to them, is that a large, right? You don't say what size, because then they have to think about all of the options and pick one. You just say, is that a large? You kind of assume that it would be, right? And 9 times out of 10, people will just say yes. So one thing you can do to overcome too much choice for your customers is just to tell them which one they should select, respectfully. Another thing you can do is you can look at being outcome-led. And so this is another great example from Shopify. And, Shopify and MailChimp, I think, are both good examples in that they're categories that you don't shop often. Most people don't know off the top of their head what 100 different email service providers offer. Most people don't know what all the different e-commerce providers offer either. And so this is a really nice way where just in a couple of sentences underneath the different product names, it becomes very clear which one of these categories that you should fit into, whether you are just starting up or whether you are growing or whether you are an advanced business looking to scale. And all you really need to look at is those little descriptions underneath the titles and the dollar figures, and you can pretty much ignore everything else on the table because you've got confidence that the outcome that they're saying this product is for is the one that I am looking for. Another kind of interesting example of where we've seen this solved is by Nike ID. So if anybody here is a like-minded sneakerhead like I am, you would know that Nike have had this service called Nike ID for longer than seems possible. They've been doing this for almost 20 years now, when I don't even know how they made the technology to do it. But Nike ID is a system where you could go on to the Nike website and customize dozens and dozens of different shoes to within an inch of their life. So every piece of material, from the laces to the color of the swoosh, to the color of the outsole, to the color of the air bubble, right? And in principle, this is a wonderful idea. I mean, this is a dream come true. Who doesn't want to be a sneaker designer? And not just designing some random sneakers, like you get to design your own pair of iconic Nikes. Now, what I experienced and what no doubt millions and millions of other people experienced was starting this process dozens, if not hundreds of times, and then very, very quickly becoming overwhelmed because I don't know. By choice 11, I'm so maxed out. I don't know what color stitching I should have around my blue swoosh. I give up. I'm just going to go to the store and pick from a small selection that they've already designed for me. And so if you go into Nike ID now, they found some really interesting ways to circumvent this, where they will give you base plates to start with. And you can also see what the last 20 people who customized this shoe did with it. So it kind of gets it halfway there for you, and you can just add your little finesse at the end. Again, it's a paradox, right? We think we want the choice, but we're really not very well equipped to handle it. And I think the last example I'm going to give you guys of this one, and it's kind of obvious, but I think it's a really wonderful illustration of how to handle the paradox, which is the idea of having filters. And when you look at really good e-commerce websites and you wonder why the filtering system works, it's because they don't take away your illusion of choice. They show you that, yes, there are thousands and thousands of products available for you. We're not taking the choice away. You deserve choice. You love choice. You demand choice. It's all here. But through a series of filters, we are going to let you condense those thousands and thousands of options down to this small number that you feel comfortable browsing through, right? And if at any time you want to expand your list back out, you just untick or retick some filters and they're all going to come straight back. So a really nice way of letting people feel not so anxious about having to wade through thousands or sometimes millions of products on big e-commerce websites. So our first lesson from our first bias or heuristic today is to think about how we give people fewer but better choices. And look, I know sometimes the choice is not driven by us. Sometimes it's driven by our retailers and partners and other vendors who are demanding us give people more options and more variants. But sometimes it is up to us. And I would just encourage you to ask yourselves, how can we do a better job at not bamboozling people? How many marginal variants do our customers need? How many calls to action, various calls to action do we need on our website? How many different navigation items do we need? How many different ways should people have to get in touch with us? And the short answer is not that many, and probably fewer than we think. So, especially throwing a sort of post-COVID lens on this, I think people are, stressed enough about where life has been over the last 12 months. And so, I can tell you based on the research that giving people fewer but better options will reduce anxiety, it will increase conversion, and it will make people happier with the thing they've bought afterwards, right? So it is absolutely something to think about how you can use as we roll through 2021. Fewer but better choices. So that is one. The second of our three biases we're going to go through today is one called the effort bias. And the effort bias is all about how we determine the value of something. And determining the value of something is a skill or a task that we're required to do many, many times a day. Every time we're deciding whether to exchange our time or our effort or our money for something, we are making some sort of an assessment about what is the value of the thing we're about to receive in return. And working out the value of something is actually very, very, very difficult. So again, if we go back a few hundred years, maybe a few thousand years, determining the value of something was perhaps a little bit easier because you were likely purchasing it off the person who made it. Right, so you were buying a basket from a basket weaver, you were buying bread from a baker, you were buying a sword from a swordsmith. I don't know, I always think very Games of Thrones when I imagine these like market scenes of people buying stuff, right? But you're literally buying the thing off the person who's made it. And with that in mind, it is usually a reasonable assumption that the more effort the person put into making this thing, the more valuable it is. Like there's a pretty direct correlation. Somebody who spends a week making a sword, the sword's probably going to be better than somebody who spent half an hour making a sword. The challenge today, 2021, is just like looking around the desk in front of me, whether it's a phone or a pen or a pair of AirPods. It is very, very hard to, like, what is the value of a pair of AirPods? How much effort went into making this? It's basically impossible to know. And in fact, I think there's a kind of famous book written about the idea that there's not a single person on planet Earth that knows how a grey lead pencil is made. You know, our value chains have become so complicated and there's so many pieces of the puzzle that it's basically impossible to know how even the most basic items in front of us get put together. So trying to determine value based on how much effort went in is also basically impossible. So instead, you know, we kind of look for clues. We look for other hints that tell us what is the value of something, right? We ask ourselves things like, what does the price tell me about the value of this thing? What does the retail environment that I'm shopping in tell me about the value of this thing? What does the brand tell me? What does the packaging tell me? What do the other people who buy this tell me about this, right? And while those things do kind of help, there is this unshakable kind of wiring within us that cannot separate the idea that putting more effort in means there is more value coming out. Now, if we think about this at a societal level, right, we learn to recognize and praise effort almost universally. So for those of us with kids, I mean, we tell our kids, right, put the effort in and you will get the outcomes that you want. And even if you don't win, it's how you play the game, right? It's how hard you work. I just want to see you try, right? Effort is virtuous. Effort is romanticized. Effort is admired. Right? We all love working with people who put in the effort, right? Now, of course, more effort going in equals more value coming out is not always true. Sometimes you need to put more effort in just because you kind of suck at the thing that you're doing. So I can assure you guys, if you contracted me to make a table for you, it would require a lot of effort going in and the outcome would not be very good. The reason for that is I am not very handy. I'm not very good with tools. I don't think I've ever made a table in my life, right? So it's not always true. More effort going in, more value coming out. However, we find it very, very hard cerebrally to detangle one from the other. We see this play out in lots of ways. But first, what I want to talk to you guys about is a quick piece of research that demonstrated this. And I love this research because it's kind of sneaky. And you guys can all imagine exactly how this would have played out. So this research was done by Kruger et al. In 2004. And what happened in this research is they brought participants in, they randomly assigned them into two groups, and each group was assigned the same set of poems. And they were asked to read the poems and then provide ratings on how much they enjoyed the poem, the overall quality of the poem, and also how much they thought a poetry magazine should pay for that poem if they wanted to publish it in their magazine, which apparently back in 2004, poetry magazines paying for content was still very, very much a thing. Not so much today, I imagine. The only difference between the two groups is that one group was told these poems had taken 4 hours to write. The other group was told that the same poems had taken 18 hours to write. Right? And you guys already know how this story ends, right? The group that had been told the poems took 18 hours to write consistently rated them as of higher quality, they were more enjoyable, and that they were worth more money than the exact same poems for the group who had been told they had taken 4 hours to write. Now, this type of research has been done dozens and dozens and dozens of times. It has been done with amateurs and experts alike. It has been done with pottery, with paintings, with whiskey, with wine, right? Even people who really should know better find it very, very hard to separate the idea that when more effort goes in, more value comes out. Now, you could be jumping to the incorrect conclusion here that the recommendation on effort bias is to make stuff look really hard, right? Add some complexity, add some difficulty to what you're doing. And I just want to be very, very clear that that is not the recommendation. Because the reality is, if you are in business, there is already really difficult stuff that you are doing, right? You just might not notice. And really, the key takeaway for the effort bias, right, is about surfacing and celebrating the complexity that already exists in your business, brand, product, or service, right? And we see this in lots and lots of different places. So this is a hallmark of the craft booze industry. Whiskeys and gins and all of these things talk about the time and the process. They celebrate how hard it is to make 100 bottles of this wine, or to make this particular type of whiskey that has to sit in a climate-controlled barrel in some obscure location where the conditions are just perfect for 72 years before you're allowed to taste it, right? This is also the same on any craft or artisanal product. If you think about luxury bags or clothing, they all talk about how expert they are and how much work they put in to producing a simple scarf or a hat or a bag. On the internet, we see this play out in some funny ways as well. So, I'm not sure if this is still true. I think it is. This was absolutely true back in the day. And in using some of these sites still, I assume this is still correct. Now, this is about comparison sites. So whether, it's a Webjet or an iSelect or a Trivago, any website that you're trusting to go and get a whole bunch of results from the internet for you. And what studies have shown is that these sites are perceived to be doing a better job if they just run a little bit slower than they need to. So, 2021, the internet's pretty good in most places. Google has indexed the whole of the internet, and we're pretty used to getting results instantly. In fact, even while we type, we get results starting to come up. So it is kind of odd that when you go to a Trivago or a Webjet, you type in some pretty standard things, what city you're in, what city you're going to, and when you want to travel. And it kind of takes 4 or 5 seconds, and it tells you we're currently searching the internet to find you the best deals, right? They do that on purpose. Right? They deliberately slow it down because we can't help but feel if this site has taken a couple of seconds to actually go and find all of this stuff, it is probably looking in really, really hard parts of the internet. It is probably not, just looking at the easy bits of the internet, like I would be looking at. It is really getting into the deep, dark corners and finding all of the really highly valuable flights or hotel bookings that I otherwise wouldn't get to. And if they return the results instantly, we might not have the same faith in the results. We see this play out, we see a lot of biases play out in restaurants, and I think this is a great example of one as well, where if you were building a hot restaurant, any time in the last, up in human history, well, I don't know, any time in the last 100 years, up to maybe 10 years ago, right, there was a very, very distinct place where the kitchen would go. The kitchen would go up the back, kind of out of sight, and you have this little window called a pass, which is where the chefs and the cooks basically plate up the food, they put it on there, and then the wait staff carried out to the tables. And we completely abstract all of the work that is going in, that's like hidden out the back, with the dining experience that customers were allegedly there for. If we look at restaurants today, especially the trendy restaurants in any city in the world, where is the kitchen? Right? The kitchen is right in the middle of the restaurant where everybody can see it. And oftentimes the best seats in these restaurants are at the chef's table, sitting around that kitchen in the middle of the restaurant, so you can see the work going in, you can see the effort, you can see the way they slice that sashimi, you can see the way they drizzle the sauce on the top, and you cannot help but be a little enamored, right, by what they're doing, and you cannot help but feel that the food tastes just a little bit better because you have seen. It's taking every bit of effort for me to not say how much blood, sweat, and tears has gone into it, but hopefully there's no blood, no sweat, no tears in your food, but you have seen the way that the talented chefs have labored over the dish that they are serving up for you guys. And again, there's a lesson in here for all of us. A couple of very quick COVID-related examples. Something we've all become very, very familiar with is parcel tracking and all of the deliveries that turn up at our homes many, many times a week. And you got to wonder why these parcel delivery companies, the FedExes and the DHLs of the world, would invest all of this time and money and infrastructure in all of the notification services that they give us. Like literally every time a parcel is picked up, moved across a warehouse, somebody puts a sticker on it, then they put it on a truck, then the truck drives around the corner, takes it to another warehouse, it gets off the truck. You literally get a notification or an update every time one of these things happen. That's kind of crazy, right? We're not paying them for that. We're just paying them to get the box of shoes from New Mexico to Melbourne. But what they've realized is two things. Number one is if we just tell people where their stuff is at before they ask, we're probably going to reduce their anxiety levels, and they're probably not going to call us to ask where their package is because they already know. So that's good. The other thing that happens is you get to see the effort that goes in, right? None of us really know how these boxes go from the other side of the world to our front doors. But when you see how many places they go, how many people have to be involved with this, how many steps there are along the journey, you can't help but feel a little bit more impressed about the world that we live in. And maybe, just maybe because of that, we would feel a little bit more forgiving when something that was meant to get here by 12 doesn't turn up until 4, because we've seen, God, this has really gone around the world a long way, and can't help but appreciate the effort that they've put in. Maybe it is a more valuable service. I think the last effort from COVID-related stuff I want to give you guys is something really interesting that Delta did. So this was when all the COVID stuff was really firing up, and everybody was saying, oh, no one's ever going to fly again. And, you know, the idea of surfacing and celebrating the complexity that already exists in your business is really well captured by what Delta did. So they did this thing, this would probably be April or May last year when everything was going a bit wild. They launched this whole kind of product service campaign around the idea of Delta Clean. And what there was a website and there was a video and there were ads basically talking about how before every flight, the aircrafts are cleaned using this extensive checklist, and even domestic flights are now cleaned with the same love and attention that only the overnight international flights used to get. They talk about specifically disinfecting all the high touch areas, the armrests and the seat back displays. And they talk about how customer service agents, so the hosts and hostesses on the flights, had the power to call back the cleaning staff, the ground staff, to come and re-clean the plane if they didn't feel that it was clean enough to be taking off again. Now, really, this was just a video telling everybody that they cleaned the plane, right? Which we kind of know they did. I didn't need a video to explain to me that you guys are cleaning the plane. Like, I kind of hoped you were doing that anyway. Like, we don't need to say hotels doing this. I hope you guys are cleaning the thing when one group leaves before the next group comes in. But they did a wonderful job of surfacing and celebrating all of this effort that probably every airline in the world was going to, but these guys just got there first. They named it, they owned it, and it really helped Delta do pretty well in an otherwise very, very tumultuous period. Now, the last example of this I'm going to give you guys is this idea of exclusive clubs. And why this is interesting is because the effort bias works on ourselves, right? We feel that when we join clubs, whether they are actual clubs like the Melbourne Club or a golf club or a tennis club, any kind of exclusive club that is very, very tough to get into, right? Or a virtual club like people who've run marathons or people who've done Ironman events or people who've swum the English Channel, anything that requires lots of effort and self-discipline, we tell ourselves that a group that is really hard to get into is seriously worth belonging to. And the harder it is to get into this club, virtual or actual, the more valuable and worthwhile it is to be a part of it, right? So this doesn't just work in products and services that we sell to each other. This also works on the stories that we tell ourselves. So the second lesson from our second bias for today is to let them see you sweat, right? Don't make stuff up, but surface and celebrate the inherent complexity that already exists in your business's brands, products, and services. And what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to fly straight into our third bias because I want to make sure we've got at least sort of 5-10 minutes for questions at the end. And this is around temporal discounting. So temporal discounting is the idea that we tend to massively over-index the here and now, right? While reducing the value of things as they move off into the future, right? So we reduce the value of things that are further off into the future, and the further away these benefits are and the hazier these future benefits are, the more rapidly we discount them, right? The more rapidly we reduce the value of them, which makes us more likely to exchange them for things that bring us happiness right here, right now. So, it turns out, perhaps not surprisingly from an evolutionary perspective, we are wired to prefer smaller and sooner rewards over larger and later ones, right? So this kind of makes sense because for most of human history, like anything long-term was probably a long shot at best. So it makes sense to be wired to just eat the donut if it's in front of you, because God, there might not be another one tomorrow, right? We could be dead. We could be chased down by wildebeests. So, we should prioritize the right here, right now over a very uncertain future. So this kind of makes sense from a biological evolutionary perspective, but I think there is also some other really interesting things at play here about why we choose short-term over long-term. And one way to bring this to life is with a really interesting piece of research called the Australian Unity Wellbeing Index. And what I really like about this study is, number one, it's pretty big. It goes out to tens and tens of thousands of Australians every year. And number two, it's been running for a very long period of time. And what's great about this research is it's very, very simple. So it goes out to Australians, tens of thousands of them at a time, and asks them this very simple question. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not at all satisfied and 10 being completely satisfied, how satisfied are you with life as a whole? On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not at all satisfied, 10 being completely satisfied, how satisfied are you with life as a whole? Now I'm just going to pause here for a second. Just going to let you guys all think about what your own answer is for this. If you feel inclined, write it down. I'm not going to ask you for them. It's fine. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys the results over a 15-year period. Right, so here's some results between 2001 and 2015. And what you guys may or may not remember over this 15-year period of time is lots of stuff happened in Australia. We had famines, we had floods, we had a GFC, economic booms and busts, the mining industry went berserk. We had lots and lots of great things happen. A couple of really good Olympic Games where Australia did really well. So all of the things that you would expect to see people's overall happiness or overall satisfaction with life track as we see in this graph. However, where things get a bit weird is when I put the scale in. And what we see when I put the scale in is that all of this fluctuation happened between, 7.39 and 7.67 out of 10, right? So, less than 3% change over a 15-year period. And in fact, the most recent one of these that was conducted, which was in May of last year, so that is basically in the middle of the corona pandemic, gave us a rating of 7.645, right? So it doesn't seem to matter, right? We're pretty much in this band. And when scientists see this, they go, this is weird. This is not what I expect. What is going on here? And what has been determined is that we seem to have a natural set point for our satisfaction or for our happiness, which we self-regulate around, right? It is homeostatic. So in the same way, if we're cold, we put clothes on. If we're hot, we take clothes off. We seem to self-regulate our own happiness or satisfaction levels as well. It's kind of automatic, right? If you imagine when you feel really down in the dumps for a prolonged period of time, if you are a healthy human being, you get some voices in your head that tell you, it's okay. It's not so bad. We've been through worse. We'll be fine. We have it so much better than everybody else. And we kind of drag ourselves back up to around 7.5 out of 10. Similarly, if we feel too happy for too long, right? And being too happy for too long is also not great, because when you're too happy, you're too trusting, you make bad decisions, right? So it's also not good to be walking around at a 9.5 out of 10 all the time. Same thing happens, right? You're too happy for too long. The voices in your head start reminding you about maybe an unresolved conflict or a family issue or a looming assignment kind of in the future that you haven't started, or maybe a weird look that somebody gave you yesterday. And I wonder why he or she looked at me like that. Maybe I did something wrong, right? And again, we suck ourselves back down to about 7.5 out of 10. So what this sort of nets out at is that we regulate around the idea of being 75% good, 75% positive, 75% optimistic. Why save for our retirement, right? Or abstain from the donuts when our superannuation is probably just going to save itself and our six-pack is probably chiseling itself, because 75% good is really all we've ever known in life. So why prioritize the future, right? It's going to be fine. We see this come to life in a multitude of different ways. So number one, for businesses, products, services, and brands that meet short-term needs, whether that is pain relief or hunger or thirst, it pays to go pedal to the metal, knowing that people are wired to prioritize the short term over the long term, right? Snickers' parent company, Mars, are doing some wonderful work with reforestation, saving the environment, reducing their carbon footprint, all of that stuff. When they're advertising Snickers, they don't talk about any of that, right? If you are hungry, put this in your face, you will feel better. Enough said, right? And obviously hugely, hugely successful for them. We've seen the rise of a whole category, not surprisingly, all based around the idea that you can have something right now and pay for it later. And how archaic does the concept of lay-by look, where it's like, I'll have the pain now and the benefit later. It was only a matter of time before somebody flipped that and said, well, how about you have the benefit now and you just take the pain over for equal monthly installments, right? And for those of you guys not following the financial markets, the rise of Afterpay, which I think was the first share ever to be valued in single digits, double digits, and triple digits in the same year. So last year it went from under $10 to over $100, just shows how deep the desire for immediate gratification is in humans, and it is essentially universal. I think there are some interesting lessons for the not-for-profits of the world in this as well. And 3 quick examples I'm going to whip you guys through. One is for thank you order. And, you know, these guys do a wonderful job. Do not get me wrong, right? They absolutely do an incredible job as far as their corporate responsibility and their purpose in life. But I think the real genius behind thank you water is that before these guys, there was no water that you could carry and walk down the street that said, yes, I'm thirsty, but I'm also a really decent person, right? I'm interested in bringing clean water to those who don't have it, right? Thank you did that, right? They gave us these miniature billboards that we could all carry around. And then when they saw that it worked, they took this brilliance and let us erect dozens of mini billboards all over our homes and offices with, you know, hand soaps and moisturizers and everything else that these guys sell, telling anybody who's interested in looking, right, that yes, we're important in good long-term things, but we're signaling in the short term that we are good, worthwhile, decent people. I think the same thing has happened with Who Gives a Crap. And again, these guys do an incredible job in the world, and I'm not taking anything away from that. I absolutely applaud it. Right? But when people say the genius of their business is donating to charity, I say, well, you're kind of missing the point, right? Because there's lots of businesses that donate to charity. Lots of those charity giving businesses have not realized the importance of giving people some immediate benefit as well. And what Who Gives a Crap have done through their amazing brand story and their incredible packaging is they have come up with a type of toilet paper that cafes and households around the world are happy to put on display because it says something great about them. Right? It says I'm cool. It says I'm trendy. It says I'm supporting people less fortunate than me. And, you know, before Who Gives a Crap, this did not exist as a concept. And the idea that people would build extra shelves in their guest bathrooms to display their Who Gives a Crap toilet paper would have been laughable. But check Instagram. It is a real thing and it's what's happening, right? And again, I think that is the real genius, giving people a short-term payoff for a long-term gain. I won't go into the Patagonia example in too deep detail, but it really is the same story, right? These guys are setting out to save the world. If just saving the world was enough, they wouldn't need to print the labels on the outside. But evidently saving the world is not enough. You also need to tell people that you're helping do it, right? Otherwise, unfortunately, what's the point? Any personal trainer worth their weight in protein powder knows the value of progress shots. So there's little photos that you get along your workout journey, and they make what would otherwise be a very long, slow, boring, tired 6, 12, 18-month journey kind of interesting and inspiring by giving those little short-term hits of endorphins and encouragement along the way. 1 or 2 more really quick examples. One is just from the world of health insurance. Again, rationally, pragmatically, buying private health insurance should make sense, right? We should know that it is the right thing to do, but often what makes sense and what we're motivated to do are not the same thing. And that is why you see, I mean, this is an example from Booba, but we see lots and lots of players do this, offering immediate rewards, whether it's gym memberships, free sneakers, frequent flyer points, like something that today you want and values to ensure that you're looking after tomorrow you as well. And the last example here is from the world of toothpaste. And literally, you could not think of a better example of misaligned incentives, right? Brushing your teeth, it's a real direct cost to you. It is 2 minutes twice a day for your entire life, right? So the cost is real and immediate. The benefit is kind of long-term and hazy, right? So you do this thing 4 minutes a day for the hope that when you are older and you still want to eat, that you have teeth to chew apples. And what this was wonderfully solved in the early 1900s by a company called Pepsodent. And what these guys did was they started adding some elements to toothpaste. So they added a foaming agent, they added some mild irritants that give you that tingling, and they added mint. And what all of these ingredients do, right, they don't make your teeth any cleaner, but they give you immediate short-term feedback that the toothbrushing is working. And we've come to crave that feeling, right, that tingling, that mintiness, that freshness. And if we don't do it, we kind of miss it. Right. And so by adding these things that are kind of irrelevant to how the brushing your teeth works in the long term, they have given us great short-term feedback to keep us on track with great long-term beneficial behaviors. So the third lesson from the heuristic for today is to think about the right here, right now. And yes, a lot of us are increasingly doing good things for the planet, for the people, for the communities we operate in for the future. A lot of us sell products and services for future benefits. But we also need to really think about how we're going to motivate people in the moment, because that is what's driving that reptilian brains at the back of our skulls to make the majority of our decisions. So that is it for today. Just a little recap. We talked about choice paradox, which is about giving people fewer but better choices, effort bias, which is letting them see you sweat, and temporal discounting, which is thinking about what can we give people right here, right now to incentivize them to make a decision. So with that, I'm going to hop off the share screen and see if you guys have got any questions.
Excellent session, Dan. I was speaking to Brenda after the last event, and I think she sort of said it best. It's a perfect balance of science and marketing for us. So our audience today is marketing and reg. We've got a good mix of both. So thank you for another great session. Let's go into the first question. We don't have many questions, so please send them through if you do have a question. How do we reconcile the need for personalisation, which is quite popular in our industry at the moment, personalisation of medicine, of products and services that has emerged lately with the paradox of too much choice?
I love this. I love this. I think when personalisation is done well, it is exactly solving this. Right? When personalisation is done really well, we are taking a lot of the choice away from people and just giving them their next best action or this medicine that they need to take and not have to battle a whole array of options. So there's probably some thinking to be done in the setup for that, in how people work out what personalized option they get so that they understand that they're making choices or choices are being made for them. But I think these two actually don't work against each other. I think when done well, they work beautifully with one another and can help reduce people's anxiety by only showing them good options that we think are appropriate for them.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. I think that's it for the questions. There's no more questions. Yeah, we got swamped last time, and I felt awful how long we kept you with the Q&A. So, oh wait, one's comes through. So I'll just quickly. Oh, they're just typing it up. So what I might do is I might actually just go to the poll. If we could get a little bit of feedback from everybody today on the session, and I'll ask that question once you've given us a little bit of feedback. I'll give you a few seconds with that. What I thought is also worth mentioning is we done a recent survey to members about upcoming events. It's probably worth mentioning we've got the Conference and Diamond Awards Gala Dinner happening in November. So please mark that in your calendar. And we're also going to start doing in-person events later in the year. The survey indicated that people still want to do webinars for now, and we'll do in-person events later in the year. So let's have a look at that question. So going back to choice paradox, i.e. less is more, is range rationalisation then not a bad thing? Do we turn this into a positive?
So it's funny, I feel I don't have all the context for, specifically within your categories, how you guys are or aren't affected by range rationalisation. But I would say on average, there probably are too many similar choices for our customers to make. Like if we really asked ourselves, how many of these options would have to be removed from the shelves for people to really lose their minds and be devastated about what was left? It would probably be most of them. So, I think, I don't want to sound glib about it, but I think there really is a great opportunity in things like rationalization to have fewer but better choices in a particular category or a particular offer, and instead channel the energy and enthusiasm to, instead of making something 1% different here, making something significantly and meaningfully different somewhere else, and giving people real choice, not the fake choice that we, are often confronted with in most of the decisions we make each day.
Yeah. One more. How do marketers strike the balance between focusing on benefit versus process/sweat?
Awesome. Nice question. Thank you. So I think behind this question, there probably needs to be maybe a disclaimer or an explanation that none of these biases or heuristics are silver bullets. So if there was just one of these that you could turn on and it worked for every person, on every purchase, on every occasion, I'd be phoning in from the Bahamas now, and we would have clocked this, right? What these biases do is, I think about these as kind of cheat codes for the game of sales, and they give you the ability to have different advantages in different contexts. So sometimes talking to the short-term benefits are the right play. Sometimes talking to the process and the effort that goes into something is the right play. And often it depends on the type of decision that we're trying to nudge or that we're trying to get people to make. So something like these two here are both to do with value perception, right? These are both things where we're trying to get people to see more value in a product. Some heuristics are better at conversion. Some of them are better for thinking about how we architect a range. And so my suggestion would be to try some things. Often you can try things in a pretty cheap, effective way through digital display ads or search ads or small research groups. And you can see, well, what happens if we talk about the short-term benefits? How does that resonate? What happens if we talk about the process and the effort that goes in? How does that resonate?
Yeah. We've got one more, but I won't do it because we'll finish up because people want to get to their next meeting, and I can imagine everybody's got places they've got to be. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dan. Ever since I've heard about the reptilian brain, I've been trying to sort of, on a more conscious level, not sort of work from that reptilian brain. So it's great hearing what you have to say, and we do hope you can join us again. If you haven't heard Dan's podcasts, they're well worth a listen. If you haven't checked out Hardhat Agency, have a look at them. Dan would be more than happy to help you. And we get an email from Dan as well. And if you didn't opt out of sharing your details with Dan, I'm sure he'll put you on that mailing list. So if you did opt out and you want to be on the mailing list, send me an email and I'll let Dan know. So have a great day, and thank you very much, Dan. Bye to everyone.
You're doing the great work you do. See ya.